With the cost of living going wild, stress levels on 10, and more folks asking, is there really life outside the US? We thought it was about time to find real world people with real world experiences about going abroad and get their thoughts and impressions. Hi, I'm Lynn,
I'm Jace.
and welcome to our channel,
GenX
GenX Quench. And today we have very special guests with us who are just back from a trip to Panama City. And this is their first time in Panama, I do believe. I'm seeing nods. So we are going to get their impressions, their views. We've got some questions for them. And if you have been thinking about going to Panama, thinking about life outside the US, then this is the video for you. So sit back, take a listen. Don't ever forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel because this is a good one and this one is one not to be missed.
So, Brian and Deena, we want to find out from you today what you liked, what really surprised you, and could you see yourself maybe one day living in Panama, or is Panama still on your list? We know you're at the introductory stages, but that's what we really want to find out. So, we're going to just jump right into the questions.
Oh, how do we know Brian and
Oh,
Deena?
how do we know Brian and Deena? Thank you. Great reminder. I know Brian and Deena back from college. So I went to college with both of them. Brian's in my fraternity, and Brian and Deena started dating in college, and voila, they're married with kids now. So that's how I know them. And then I introduced Lynn to them, I think, at the wedding, at our wedding, was the
Yep.
first time you met.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right.
So,
Yep, Brian was in our wedding.
yes, Brian
That's
was in
right.
a wedding.
Absolutely.
So we go back a long time, and we actually vacation with Brian and Deena. So we've had those conversations on vacation. Could you see yourself living outside of the US? So
Right.
this kind of extends that conversation even further.
Right. So this is pretty much all adult, lifelong friends,
Yep.
and they are hot off the trail of going to Panama. So this is a real and unfiltered look at their initial thoughts about traveling outside the US to Panama City. Now, they have traveled worldwide, but we're going to focus this conversation on Panama and their time and their thoughts on the Black Expats in Panama Cultural Relocation Tour.
Yeah, and we've done a video with Charlotte, the owner of that company. So we'll link that to this particular video. So we're gonna just jump right in, Brian and Deena. So what
Okay, great.
originally made you say, yeah, this is a tour I think I really want to do? What did that for you all?
Well, thanks, Jace, for the question. Thanks to both of you all for the opportunity. We really appreciate it. So we actually learned about this in part, Jace, because you did this. You did this tour with your financial advisor, as I recall, within the past couple of years, and you shared a bit about that experience. And it actually dovetailed well to conversations that Deena and I had about what could it be like to visit another country, not just to vacation, but with the mindset of what it might be like to consider at least living there full time, part time. So that was really in the background. And so when we heard about the tour that you all took, and we actually read some reviews of Charlotte Van Horn's tour group and experiences people had, it really seemed to be a nice culmination of what we were looking for: cultural experiences, understanding of real estate, healthcare, other things that might influence your cost of living, quality of life. And so for that reason, it seemed like a good tour to take. So.
Outstanding. Thank you. And was there a moment or a life change that pushed you into taking that tour now versus, last year or the year before?
So I'll say I don't think it was necessarily a life change. It is, as Brian mentioned, it's something that we had talked about, thought about during our travels. Really trying to get an appreciation and have an appreciation for different cultures and the way that they live, not just trying to vacation to relax. We like to be, not just tourists but travelers.
Mhm.
And with this particular tour, as Brian mentioned, since you and your financial advisor had done it, and then later you both went back with your wives, I think this has begun to be something that we wanted to evaluate. What does life outside of the US really feel like? Is it tangible? Is it something that, we just talk about as, this one-off thing, or can we really make this something that can work? And so I think, and then getting to the point where we have our last child graduating college. Yes. And as we move closer towards, retirement age, we really wanted to take the opportunity to see really what it would be like.
Mhm.
Okay. And you may have already hit on this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Was there something you were hoping that this trip would help you figure out specifically, or just wanted to look at it in general in terms of potential living abroad?
So I would say that it's a bit of a mixed answer. It's mostly yes. We were trying to get a sense of what would specifically Panama feel like for us. We
Okay.
have we've lived in different states. We've traveled the country. We've traveled the world, as you all alluded to. But we've never really said what would this particular country really look like? What would it feel like, and what would be the experience of being there? What would it look like to be there part time? What would it be to be there longer term? And so, knowing that we have adult children, as my wife mentioned, if we were to be in another country, we also want to pick a place that's not too far to get back to the U.S. And we knew that Panama had that offer. There's many direct flights depending on where you live, and so that seemed to hold an interest to us. And I think the climate and some of the aspects of the geography, having a coastal Caribbean side and a Pacific side, seemed intriguing as well. So it seemed to hold some different opportunities for us to explore what life might be like there.
All right.
Cool. Wonderful. So you all have been back for a few weeks now. What was the first 24 hours in Panama like? What stood out to you immediately as far as landing in the country, landing in Panama City?
Yeah, so I think purposefully we, or at least I know I typically will go on YouTube and look up videos and see how it is. But I really wanted to experience this organically, so I didn't go in with any preconceived notions. So immediately as we landed, I could see how expansive the skyline was. We had a
Right.
Mm.
beautiful view, as you know, coming into the airport of the downtown area, and how many skyscrapers and how modern it looked.
Mm-hmm.
That was the first impression upon landing. And then once we settled in, we didn't really get a chance to see much of Panama that evening because we had our welcome dinner, as you guys know, having gone through this. And but that was impressive because we got to really hear firsthand from, part of Charlotte's team, how everything was going to be laid out. They came and gave us some information around healthcare and some of the things that we could come to expect the next day when we went out on our tour. There was, I don't know, we talk about this often, being outside the U.S., especially now. There's just a sense of, relaxation. But it really felt like home, and in a way that I can't really describe or put my finger on. But we had a chance to tour a couple of developments, and they were so modern and really, well kept, and we got a chance to really hear from some of the individuals that worked with the development companies. And we just got a sense of, really, well, at least started to get a sense of how much our money would get us, in terms of real estate. And just how, friendly everyone was, of course. And it really felt like home.
Mm-hmm.
Very good.
Hmm. I think that is a key thing as far as like, I mean, you just get into a country, and granted, there is this tour and there are other people, but you can't put words to the fact of like
Right.
calling it home.
Yes.
It's seeing people that look like you, people being friendly,
Right.
knowing that you're in a strange place, but somehow it still feels familiar.
Yes.
That's
Yeah,
right.
Yes.
I think that's key. So, giving to that, what did the tour do well in showing those different lifestyles within just the span of the week that you were there?
No, that's a great question, Lynn. So I would say this, because we were exposed to what city living might be like, especially in Panama City, we also had a chance to visit suburban areas. And then we were exposed to coastal areas, especially on the Pacific side. We definitely were given a myriad of opportunities to understand what it might be like to be in a high rise, to be in a condo or a duplex, or to be
Mhm.
something where you could walk to the beach in a few minutes or be directly facing it. In the cities that we've lived in the US, we've had varying experiences, but the reality of it is that many of those have been suburban experiences. So
Mhm.
the notion of being in a high rise where you could walk downstairs, walk to a local bar or restaurant, within a moment's throw of your front door, that was unique to us as well. It's something that we haven't typically had that experience living in the US. But then I think also coastal, it was nice to see what really the value that you could get from owning a property on the coast, especially when you think about what some of those properties would be like stateside. I mean, and it was
Right.
definitely going to be a significant savings if I'm really being honest. So I do think that was unique. It was something that we didn't quite expect. we weren't really sure, that it would feel as feasible. But then once we had a chance to start to visit these properties and get a sense of that, it was a great revelation to us. So.
Yeah. What was the best moment of the week?
I would say for me, definitely our cultural day. We got a chance to really relax and let our hair down. I have some incriminating footage I think I sent to you of your fraternity brother entertaining us on the bus. But we had a really good time being able to go over to Cologne and Portobello, seeing that because that's the Caribbean side of Panama. Mm-hmm. And we got to go over there, and we had our wonderful tour guide taught us so much about Afro-Panamanian culture. We got to see the Black Christ and the secondary museum that we went to. I forget the name of it right now, forgive me. But it just really connected us as people, and I think you know what I mean, connected us as people to Panama. It was an opportunity for us to learn about our contributions and the contributions of Afro-Panamanians to Panama. Right. And then we also went to a wonderful Black-owned restaurant right on the waterfront. We had an amazing time. We got to see the recital of the children, the local children dancing, and we really enjoyed that day, I would really say. And then we also had some other people join us on that day from the area. So that was definitely my favorite day. We had a wonderful time. Brian knows this, but somewhere along the way, walking back, my AirPods case, it's still in Cologne. It fell out of my purse and landed in the water. And I was like, yeah, it's fine. We were having a really enjoyable time. So that definitely was our favorite day.
Mm-hmm. Okay, outstanding. Yeah, and I would say during my time there, that day probably was the most special in terms of the connection with the people, because it's like we're different, but we have so much in common from an ancestry standpoint. And the first day we landed, my friend Al, who went with us, also said, like, I don't feel out of place. I feel like I'm home. Like you almost feel a connection right away. So
absolutely.
I thought that was really special. But let me ask this question. What did you think of Charlotte's or BEIP, the company, support of Afro-Panamanian culture, like the way she integrates that? What were your thoughts on that?
Yeah, appreciate it, Jace. Yeah, one thing I will say is that it was very refreshing and it was encouraging to recognize the Afro-Panamanian, the Black-owned businesses that were there, that were obviously ones that we could patronize. And I think because we vacation so frequently, or we make an effort to, it is always unique when you're in an environment that's conducive to that, to feeling as though you're supporting the local community. I thought that was a good demonstration of Charlotte's efficacy as a planner, her thoughtfulness in terms of making sure that those businesses were well represented. And it was actually something that I felt even more of a connection to Panama, because I felt like if we lived here, if we were spending time here, these are the types of businesses we would want to patronize. These are places that we would want to go and spend money, especially given the service that we were provided and the pleasure with which people seem to be of service and to want to be of support. So so I was very encouraged that she did include that, and I thought it was great for everyone involved. So
yes.
Okay. Following up on that, with kind of the climate, at least at the time of this recording, between the USA, Panama, the whole canal zone, all of those things.
Yep.
How did you feel? Did you feel welcomed by the community? And I would say either Afro-Panamanians or broader non-Afro-Panamanians. And then how did that show up on the tour for you?
Absolutely. We felt welcome right, as soon as we landed. Definitely, and I commended Charlotte at the end of our farewell dinner. Just how wonderful everyone was, but not in a sense that they were friendly, because we all know what that feels like. Thank you for coming. It was so genuine and heartfelt, and really emotional at times, because people really wanted to take care of us and make sure we had a good time. And then we had an opportunity to visit. I know I remember the coffee shop that we went to not too far from the hotel, and Brian actually speaks a good bit more Spanish. I'm learning.
Mhm.
But he was like, well, the person working at
Right.
the coffee shop was like, that's okay. I'll practice my English, you
Right.
practice. And everybody just was so wonderful and so friendly. We just really felt embraced.
Mhm.
And just really can't say enough, because that's not always the case and it's not a given.
Right.
We understand as Americans the heft of who we are and where we are in the
Sure.
world, and but to really not have an inkling of any sort of disgruntlement or frustration or impatience with not being fluent in Spanish. It was wonderful.
Mhm.
Okay.
Mhm.
Thanks.
That's good. Now, you mentioned the coffee shop, you talked about the real estate. What surprised you? You got a little taste of the local economy, to a
Mhm.
certain degree. What surprised you about the cost of living
Mm.
there, as far as just in the days that you were there versus
Sure.
what you expected?
Yeah, I can mention some things, Lynn. It was interesting because I do think that because Panama City is a major city,
Yeah.
it is definitely a hub for a lot of business travelers and others for that part of Central and Latin America. There are some things about that that probably make it a little bit more expensive than maybe some of the other parts of the country.
Mhm.
So I did recognize that, just like in comings and goings and buying meals and things of that nature. But what I think was clear was that from a real estate perspective, it was definitely very different than it is in the US. That was the first part. The second part is that there were many aspects of just maybe doing local transactions, ordering Ubers, things that might cost a significant amount more in the US were much more reasonable there. We learned how inexpensive public transportation is to get all the way
Yes,
from the
yeah.
airport into the downtown area of Panama City and other places. We were kind of surprised by how inexpensive it was compared to some of the prices that you pay in the US. So that was eye opening. And so when you balance it out and you start thinking about the different areas that you might choose to live in, either part time or full time, it felt much more realistic than it did, I think, before we had taken this tour. So,
Yes.
Yeah, that's a good perspective because it's like, okay, you could eat as cheaply or as expensively.
right.
Yes.
The Ubers were definitely eye-opening. I
It was
mean, we would
shocking.
have an Uber that we had to go someplace in the morning, like during rush hour, and it was a
Mhm.
40-minute Uber ride, and it still was
Mhm.
like $9 or something. I
Right,
mean,
Right.
right.
things like, I mean, we weren't necessarily going far, but just traffic and a
Sure.
peak
Sure.
time.
Right.
And I was like, oh, this would be like a $20-$25 trip in America.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah,
So I think that the whole lifestyle can
Mhm.
be how you design it in
That's
Panama.
right.
yes.
And
Mm.
That's
and
right.
that's eye-opening downtown because it shows you instead of having a car payment, okay, maybe I could just use
Yes.
public transportation or Ubers, and give yourself an allotment that's still under a car payment and insurance, et cetera. So
Absolutely. You are so
Hmm.
correct
That's
about
right.
that.
That's
Yeah.
right.
So that was really eye-opening. And then, I don't know if this was a follow-up question, but we definitely heard firsthand, about healthcare. And
Mhm.
we had, people that live there share, well, I had this procedure done and it cost me this much. And prices that were our deductible, for
Yeah.
I've been
Right.
quoted that, like, I have insurance, but
Right.
yeah, so that's a whole other conversation. But yeah, it was definitely eye opening. And I will say we've traveled enough to know that we've seen things and compared them with the cost of the US, and it's always um humbling and shocking,
Sure.
how
Completely
inexpensive
agree.
things can be in other places.
So you mentioned healthcare and just digging a little bit deeper on that. So after having some of those conversations, do you feel more confident? Does it feel more realistic as far as potentially being in another country, whether it's short term or long term? And if some health crisis arose, how would you feel as far as from your understanding of healthcare in Panama City now versus before you went?
Mhm.
I can mention some things. I mean, I will say that because during the tour early on, we were able to meet with a local physician, and he talked about some of the services that he and his organization provides, and that was eye opening. But I think also, as Dina had alluded to, just understanding the differential in cost potential around certain procedures, and then recognizing that you have world-class healthcare in Panama.
Right.
I don't think that everyone that travels from the US or other countries is always going to realize that. And so just even getting a sense of that and then understanding that when you're in another country, especially for those of us of a certain age, we're probably more concerned about longevity and also the quality of care that we might experience well into our later years in life. And so knowing that and understanding that Panama really is as top tier as any place could be in
Right.
terms of the quality of care was not just eye opening, but it was actually affirming in terms of like thinking about that as a place to live. So
Absolutely.
Well, I think I know the answer, but for this question, I mean, now, could you realistically see yourself living day to day in any of the areas that you visited, either in the city or out?
I would say definitely. I think one of the things that we would have to think about would be, what would our how to kind of frame our expectations
right.
of what life outside the US looks like. But we definitely visited some very beautiful areas. I know when we went to, I believe it was Coronado
Yes.
area and the area on the Pacific. I mean, we visited some beautiful homes. There was one single family standalone home that was just absolutely breathtaking. It looked like something we'd seen in California, bougainvillea, growing outside. And we were like, yeah, if I would make a really bad decision impulsively and call our kids and be like, oh, okay, so you're just moving, but absolutely, I would say for sure, definitely
Right.
could see ourselves living in quite a few of the areas. I would
agree.
say.
I would agree. Yeah.
All right. Well, next question. Was there anything that you experienced during the week that you thought was harder or more difficult than you preconceived before visiting Panama? And if so, what was it?
I would say the one thing that came across is we were really encouraged by Charlotte and all of the individuals who supported us, the cultural tour director, the realtors, even those that were telling us about moving expenses and logistics for moving there. I thought that was great. One of the things that didn't happen as often for us is to be able to meet other people who were either expats that already lived there or to actually get another perspective from folks, maybe because they had taken the tour before or because they just lived locally. Deena had mentioned that we did meet a handful of people that had that experience, but I felt as though the tour is so well structured and so well planned that you're in a bit of a bubble, for the week. And I think we would benefit in a subsequent trip to be able to meet some other folks who've been living there for weeks or months or maybe a year or more to see what their experiences is like, just so we could actually have that as a point of comparison. So there really was nothing against the tour. The tour was awesome, but I think it would have just opened our expectations of what the life might be like that afterwards. I think we had to envision some of it, and that extra conversation might have helped a little bit. Yeah.
I would just jump in briefly just to say I know there was a conversation. I believe it was with Matthew. I don't know if we're supposed to mention names, but just around shipping and some of the things that the conveniences that we've all come to expect in the U.S. You can order a package on Amazon and it'll show up later that day.
Mm.
And so I know there would be some challenges and some things that would take some getting used to. And so things like that, when you think of how your life is structured, how is this going to translate or how is this going to carry over in another country? But I think we are coming to terms with, if we want this enough, there are just some things that we're going to have to, suspend our belief around, or just, learn how to do things differently. So I think that would be the one thing I would say.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, we heard about like shipping and ammo, it's not necessarily you order it and it shows up in a day and then even potentially paying to get it received or whatever. But I think it's also that if you go to another country, you're actually having a whole different lifestyle as well. I mean, if we really think about some of the Amazon purchases that we're making, I'm kind of like, I don't know if I really would even need these things.
No, exactly.
I think somewhat of the convenience makes us order, but if I'm
Right.
living a totally different lifestyle that is more at ease, that potentially is I'm downsized from my home and
Yes.
that type of thing, is like, do I really need to accumulate more stuff as well? Is that, I think it's kind of like we're here in consumerism, so that Amazon package or getting stuff shipped to you once a
Right.
week, 3 times a week, 5 times a week.
Exactly.
If I'm someplace else, if I need something, I'll just go
I'll just
downstairs,
go and
go
get
to the
it.
local market
And get it.
and get it.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Right.
And that is a valid, very valid and great point, Lynn, because there's so many things that I'm guilty of, and I'm so sorry, but it's like, okay, I don't know where that's going to be. I don't know if I'm going to find it in the store. Just so many things that you're used to having, just simply because we live here,
Right.
or
Right.
things that you need, or something breaks, and I think it really is just going to require just a different way of thinking and a different way of living that I think that we would welcome.
I
That
agree
would just,
completely.
some of those things aren't necessary. So.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
very good. Was there anything that you saw during the week that made you say, "Ooh, this is tough. I don't know if I could deal with this long term. Like this would be a short term thing."
I mean, I could mention one thing. We are not as used to, like you said, not being in an environment where we have maybe fewer of the creature comforts that we have in the U.S.
Mhm.
I will say that, when you travel the country at large, you recognize that there's a lot of diversity of experience that people have. There's a lot of diversity of financial means among some of the folks that live there, the citizens. And so it is a little bit different. You see some things, you observe some things that feel a little different than some things you might see in some of the major cities in the US. But ultimately, what I felt, and I think what my wife and I talked about when we came back, is how welcome you feel no matter what. Everywhere you go, people are friendly, people are cordial, they are considerate. And I think recognizing that there's always going to be a bit of a trade off, a little bit of give and take if you make a decision to live part time or full time in another country, be that
Mhm.
Panama or be that somewhere else. And so I think giving yourself, it's almost like you think about when the space shuttle re-enters and there's a heat shield and this kind of dealing with the re-entry, right? You move to another place, there's a period of time you have to give yourself a chance to acclimate, get more comfortable, and then settle in once you feel as though you've started to find your sea legs wherever you move to. So
That's
All right,
good.
all right.
That's good.
Yep. Was there anything, and you touched on this a little bit, like talking to people outside the expat bubble, but was there anything you wish the tour would have gone deeper on in terms of, maybe you had a question a couple days after the tour, like, "Ooh, I wish we had talked about that," or maybe they
So I
had
think
covered this.
Brian touched on this briefly, and I do know, because I think I'm on the page, the BEIP page, and I know that they do, I believe, monthly or semi-monthly meetups. I it would have been nice, but I realized within the constraints of the number of days that we were there, to be able to talk to people who actually have moved. I know that there have been any number of people that have taken this tour, Joyce and Lynn. I know you interviewed, I believe, your former classmate or coworker, and she had moved to Panama. So just getting like a firsthand experience, so you can really sit across from someone and say, "Hey, how is it really?" What are some of the things that we can expect to try to, what are going to be some hurdles or obstacles that you may see, for those of us who are
yeah,
accustomed to living in the U.S. But we know that is something that we look forward to doing we've already talked about a subsequent visit where we would maybe have a chance to sit down at that network meeting and speak with some individuals to get more of a sense of how it is living
Yeah,
really.
and
But
I
that I it's not even a negative, it's just we didn't have enough time.
that's right.
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 And I would even say as your group, your BEIP group, I don't know if you're 45 or 46,
45.
Yeah,
45. Let me get that
45.
right. 45 for
Yes.
that, for your group, as people start to transition, maybe somebody beat you down there and moves, you constantly keep in touch with your class. So
Yes,
that's
yes,
the good thing
we're
too.
still on the
The
WhatsApp group.
WhatsApp group.
I know
Right,
there's a
right,
couple that they just got their temporary visas, and
right.
you know, we and then that was something. I don't know if this was going to be a subsequent question, but just we were encouraged. Definitely, I think part of the thing that really helped us, and we talked about it, is speaking with so many couples who had the same thoughts.
right.
The same
That's
things
right.
that we're thinking about, the same. Yes, I have a child, or I have an adult child, or I'm retired, or I'm
Mhm.
nearing retirement. And we did have a couple of people who I think were further away from retirement. Um, that really helped
Right.
us, put a framework around, understanding that there are people who are thinking like us, and it was a good
Right.
number of people too.
And
Absolutely.
Um,
I was gonna say, one of the things I like about this interview is we've interviewed people who are single, like Erica, but for a
okay.
couple to go through
Yes.
this
Right.
experience, we wanted that perspective, and
Yes.
we often hear couples who may one wants to move, one wants to stay domestic.
Yes.
So again, kind of getting on the same page. How is this transition going? So just wanting to hear that perspective.
Yeah. I mean, that leads to that question of emotionally. How do you feel individually and collectively as a couple because you went through this together? And so now on the other side, how did that trip change your emotionally, how you feel about potentially living abroad one day?
Yeah. I could say something. I mean, I do think, Lynn, to your point, it is a bit of a leap of faith, to make a decision to do something like this. And, since we do have, adult children, we do also recognize that if we were to decide to do this, we'd want to have mindfulness about the frequency with which we might see them, be it us visiting the US or them coming to visit us. We also had conversations around, what would it look like for other family members to decide to go down this path and do something similar, whether it's moving directly to Panama or also considering living in another country. So emotionally, I do think that there's some things that many of us that have to take into consideration if we are caring for elders, if we have other obligations, extended circumstances where we are trying to be supportive of other people in our lives. But we also recognize that, we're of an age where we have to start planning for ourselves. My wife's had a lot of conversations around her version of 2.0 of her life and some of the choices that she's making in terms of time spent. She may decide to mention some of that. So it is important for us to think about our life together as a couple and the extent to which we have to support one another and have a good experience together, be that in the US or considering a place like Panama as a place to live. So
Yeah.
And
And
I
it's,
just brief,
go
I'm
ahead.
sorry, briefly would say, I think that it helped us really be able to say, okay, we've experienced this place. It looks like this financially. It really helps just to be able to not have it be so abstract.
right.
And so I think that helped us, not that we weren't on the same page, thankfully, but just to really say, okay, this is really what it's going to be. And I know Brian is definitely more of a, okay, I hear you, but what is it going to look like for real? So I think that was helpful
That
from
was.
that perspective.
Well, and that's the
Your
part
fraternity.
that now that you have more information,
Yes.
is this conversation or the future conversations easier or actually more complicated? Because, now you know more.
Right.
And just like what you just said, how do you feel about, yeah, the future? Does this complicate things as far as like, wow, we know this about Panama. Does this open up the door to more places? You mentioned the adult kids, caring for family members and all of that type of thing. Does it feel clearer or does it almost feel more complicated?
I think for me it feels clearer.
Mhm.
There will still be some decision making. We'll have to, kind of honestly for me, I will be weighing the experience that we had against any other place that we may look at. Because it really was hard to top, the conveniences and the feeling of it
Right.
in so many ways.
Right.
But there are some things that I know we'll have to just hammer out. I do know that we have, I think a little bit of time before we would make a serious, change. But I think that it made it clearer in that it really gave both of us, an encouragement and something to really say, okay, we're really going to make this happen. Let's plan backwards from where we want to be.
Right.
So.
Right.
Yeah, I found that for even me and Jice, it's like as we've started down this path of, residency and travel and the thought of
Yes.
living abroad, it it's actually an exciting kind of
Yes, it is.
not overwhelm or complication, but it's just like Jice mentioned in I think our previous video, it's like we got a key to the kingdom.
Yes.
It's like
Got it.
that there's a world out there are ways to live, and it's like the conversations, it's changed kind of the way we talk about the future.
Yes.
So, for us, our future conversations always kind of mention Mexico and Panama, that type of thing. I imagine that now, when you all start talking about the future, whereas it may have been the future looks, we don't know, we know we need to plan
Right.
for it.
Right.
The word Panama probably sort of is floating in those conversations more now than they were before the trip.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right.
That is so true. That is so
Yeah.
true.
All right. Who do you, after doing the tour, who do you think this tour is designed for? Who would be, I guess, the ideal person to take this tour in your mind?
Yeah. That's fair, Jice. I do think that for individuals or couples that are at a stage in life where they really are trying to evaluate what the next phase of their experience could be. I think it makes a lot of sense. There are, I think, some I would say encouragements for people who are probably, if not quite into retirement years, are approaching them. You know, when you've lived a life in a place like the U.S. and you're trying to think about what would I enjoy into my retirement years, what would make me feel satisfied, what would make me happy. I think those are the type of folks that would really benefit for this. I wouldn't say that it's not a good thing also for some younger people, but there were a handful of folks that were earlier on in their life and careers that were on the tour as well. And I could tell that some of those individuals, based on conversation, that traveled to other places,
Yes.
maybe for vacation or other purposes. And so they were also encouraged to see what Charlotte and her team had to offer in terms of understanding the real estate, the healthcare, the cost of living differences. But I think that it's probably skews a little bit more to folks that are probably closer to the point in life that we are, and trying to evaluate the next phase of what kind of experience they want to have living together, either as an individual or a couple. So.
Yeah. I will say, I honestly think younger people would benefit from it as well. I know, as you all are well versed in and know, the process of getting a visa to live somewhere
Right.
else can depend largely on where it is.
Right.
So I know for some places it really is more of a retirement thing. From what we understand of the visa process, I know that there are at least, like one or two other avenues that are not age, specific.
Right.
Right.
And so, I think as we've shared before and talked about before, something that we're continuing to encourage our children.
Right.
Please at least think or look it up and see,
That's
where
right.
else
That's right.
could you live? And I think that younger people would benefit from it as well. Gives them something to look forward to or something to think about. That you don't have to wait until you retire.
That's true.
You can
That's very true.
maybe make this work now or
Right.
or soon.
So that's a good point. What advice would you have? Are you all having more conversations since you've been back with your kids, as far as like life outside the US? And what advice would you give other parents, that if the parents are thinking about it, how have you broached it with your kids? Do they seem to be receptive? I think most of the people in our age are thinking about this once they're empty nesters. So these kids
Sure.
are adults and can make their own decision, but it'd just be interesting, just a little snapshot of any advice that you potentially could give other parents as far as like broaching this subject with the kids.
And siblings as well. Like Deena, I know you've got a few sisters, so how
Yeah.
are those conversations going?
Yes, absolutely. So I know in particular, I've had, one sister that I've talked to. She was actually going to come on the tour with her because it was near her birthday, but it was sold out. But yeah, I would definitely encourage them to just continue to, talk to your kids about what life outside, and even if it's not moving immediately,
Right.
sometimes you have to, as parents, expose your children to things so that they begin to have an appreciation for it. And again, just touching on the fact that I know depending on where you're going, there are different, stipulations and requirements. But increasingly, I've been reading more, read an article today about digital nomad visas and things where you're not required to be somewhere for your job. Maybe you can work remote and live somewhere else. Just I think the best thing you can do in lieu of, or just at least working your way up to life outside the US, the best thing that you can do is talk to your kids about, please go travel,
Right.
and see some places. It doesn't always take a lot of money. Listen, it really doesn't. Sometimes it's just the willingness to do it, and to find an avenue to do it. But just something that you have to really continue to be in communication with your children about, just experiencing life outside the US.
That's right.
It start there, and then maybe there's an avenue for you to live somewhere else.
That's good.
Get
That's
your
good.
passports. Get your passports.
Yes.
PS.
Now.
If your kids don't have a
Up to date.
passport, get it for them. Hey, you
Yes,
may need it to vote
absolutely.
soon, but hey, that's another topic.
That's another subject.
Yeah, that's a good birthday gift, holiday gift,
Yes,
is
it
Right.
the
is.
gift of
Right.
travel.
Absolutely, absolutely. When we're still, doing that as well. Like where can we go?
Right.
Instead of you don't need anything, where can we go instead? So
That's right.
Mhm.
That's right.
So I think it's safe to say after this conversation that Panama is still on your list.
Yeah.
strongly
Definitely.
consideration. Okay.
Absolutely,
Got that
absolutely.
checked.
Yeah, especially because we've not done any other expat travel. Now
Right.
we've been, I know with you all, like you've gotten your residency, your permanent residency in Mexico. We've been to Mexico,
Right.
but not for the purposes of finding another community. I know you've shared with us
Right.
some communities that we are encouraged in. I think we're going to go ahead and try to, work it
That's
into
right.
some
That's right.
travel and see if we can, find out about some other places where you could live. I mean,
Mhm.
outside of the typical vacation places.
Right.
But Panama's going to be hard to top. I know for us.
It was a great
It
experience.
was a really great experience. But of course, we're gonna evaluate and do what we think makes sense, and give it the proper amount of attention and time in researching.
Okay.
Mhm. Yeah, it's wild how trips like this sort of change the way that you travel.
Yeah.
Jace and I are talking about travel plans for this year and next year, and
Hmm.
it's
Mhm.
not necessarily really traveling with a vacation as far as like going
Right.
someplace and just vegging out on the beach, which I
Yeah.
think is still needed and necessary.
Of
But
course.
it's more about like when we're going to places, where do we want to stay where it's walkable so that we can do those coffee shops, we can be where those museums are, we can be
Yeah.
near the restaurants and not just sequestered away on a resort someplace. So
Yes.
that's the
Absolutely.
exciting thing that I think a lot of these kind of trips and the tour, it gives you also more travel confidence.
Yes.
I
That's right.
think that
That's
it's
Absolutely.
like you don't have the way that I think we used to travel 10 years ago was kind of like, you go and it's an all-inclusive resort. You don't leave the resort. You might
Hmm.
take a tour that the resort sponsored. Now it's
Right.
like, no, let me get online, read some reviews and,
Yes.
get in
Yeah.
an Uber and go,
And
do this
go and
or,
see.
self-guided tour and things like that.
Yes. 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 I know. I've tried to mix a little of that into probably sometimes to the frustration of everyone else because our kids have been like, where are we going now? Like, where do you have us going? We're walking somewhere doing something else. But, that's always been a curiosity for me. I've wanted to not only just visit a place and lounge, I really appreciate going to cities and really seeing how other people live. It's always been something that has been a passion of mine. And so, just being able to experience culture and I think Brian knows every place I've gone. I'm like, okay, I think I could live here. And he's like, you can't live everywhere. Like,
Yeah.
okay. But it is something in it, but for those who haven't taken the opportunity to do it, it's a wonderful way to see, some other
Mhm.
places and experience culture outside of what we've been accustomed to.
All
Right.
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 So I think this is the last question. We'll see. But are there any action steps or action items you're planning to take as a result of this cultural immersion trip?
I'll start, and then I know my wife, Deena, will finish. So, since she did allude to the fact that we're now considering maybe there are one or two other countries that we might want to evaluate having an experience like this, or at least considering as a place to live, we have talked about obviously visiting Mexico now with a different lens, with some mindfulness around what that could look like. And I think we're also having conversations about a couple of other countries that we like to visit, but she's at a point in life where she can help us with that a little bit more based on the
Yes.
fact that she actually has a travel company. But
Mhm.
uh, but we're actually very encouraged about seeing what Panama has to offer, in addition to a couple of other countries that are known to be good places for expats, or maybe even discovering some places that are off the radar a bit, but might actually be good for
Hmm.
us as well. So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I think that is definitely next. But Lynn, you hit it on the head. We really have. We want to make that a purpose in where we go. Like, well, before we agree, is this someplace we can live?
Right.
Or can we at least find out what the process would be? So it really has shaped it, differently for us. But um this was really just a wonderful experience. And again, I
Mhm.
can't compliment Charlotte Van Horn enough,
Right.
and her company, and the time and the effort that
That's
was
right.
taken
That's right.
to make this, not only just an experience where they kind of just drag you around, because I've been a little tour shy, but this was wonderful.
It
I
was.
can't
It
recommend it
was.
highly enough. And whether you thought you saw yourself living in Panama or not, go on the trip, because
right.
you know, you never know. Sometimes you have to see a thing to feel like it's something that you could see yourself doing. But I know we have some research to do and some things to consider. But you know, it was a wonderful opportunity.
Right.
I
And I
completely
think
agree.
I think two takeaways is that number one, we've said this before on your channel, you can always change your mind. I mean,
Yeah,
I think
Yeah.
that
yeah,
finding out information is, you know, you may be going down one path and then you find out more information and it changes the path. And like you said, you all aren't packing up your bags and leaving the country immediately, even though there are people that do that. They go on that trip and within a month they are
yes,
landed in Panama or whatever. And I think, you know, there's a little bit you could go for 2 weeks or 3 weeks. And so we encourage the people
right.
that are watching the video is that it's not any one size fits all, that you can go
Dabble.
dabble, you know, and come
Right.
back home and, you know, that type of thing, so that you have the right to change your mind. And I think the other part is just go and explore. I mean, these tours, like you said, Charlotte sets that bar so high,
Yes.
but
Yeah.
there is still kind of the curiosity that anybody can get a checklist and then figure out what country do you want to go to
Right.
and get online and be like, okay, is there a doctor in this country that I can have a consultation with? Is there a
Sure.
realtor in this country that, hey, I'm going to be there. Would you be willing to spend half a day and take me around to properties and that
That's
type
right.
of thing? But I also believe that probably in a lot of these countries, these kind of tours do exist. But
Yeah.
I also want to say that, you know, if you've got an internet connection and YouTube channels or Facebook groups, you can kind of create your own kind of, you know, immersion into a country on your own. And I think that's
Right.
the big
Right.
recommendation and takeaway too, that we kind of talk about, like scouting trips and stuff like that. Like you
Yeah.
said, it
Right.
doesn't all have to be expensive and formal. It just needs to be intentional.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because I know we heard a little bit about the tour she's doing now in Colombia. So now,
That's right.
Mhm.
That's right.
you know,
I know.
so
Yeah, which is
yeah.
similar to this one. Yeah,
Right.
Panama.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's
So,
right.
you know, we are encouraged. I think the main takeaway, if I could just say one word, how do you feel? Encouraged. Encouraged by the tour, encouraged by what we saw, encouraged by the wonderful people that we met on the tour, that shared their experiences. And you know, it really, you know, it really is going to be hard to top his
That's
experience,
right.
but we feel encouraged to continue to do our research and,
Yes.
you know, find the fit that's best for us. You know, if it's not Panama, it could be somewhere else. Or, yeah, as you mentioned before, the idea of slow travel, you
That's
know,
right.
is
Mhm.
another possibility too. But, you know, it's good to be able to take a breath
Yeah.
outside of everything that's going on.
And I'll just mention we're thankful, Jice and Lynn, for your guidance and counsel
Yes.
and the example that you set, because I feel that you're
Yeah.
shining a light on conversations and challenges that many of us at various stages of life, definitely in our sort of demographic group, are all kind of working through. And
Yes.
so appreciate what you're doing and the opportunity to be able to speak to you all about the experience that we had as well. So thanks for that.
Yes.
And
Thank you
we
Oh,
so much.
certainly appreciate it. I know we've talked about next time we go to Panama, do we go to Boca del Toros or
Yes.
Buquete? There's other places we want to see, you know,
mhm.
say, okay,
Mhm.
we know Panama City pretty good. Let's go see
Yeah,
some other
I'm really
parts.
curious about Paquete. You know,
Yes.
that sounded
Yes, that's right.
amazing as well.
Yeah,
That'll be a
it's a
great
big
visit.
world out there. It's a big world out there.
Absolutely.
So we thank you for the thanks and we thank you for
Thank
your
you.
time.
Yep.
Quench crew, hopefully that you have gotten some takeaways from this video, especially if you're single or if you're a couple with adult children. If you've had any kind of reservations about potentially life outside the US, hopefully this has been helpful.
Right.
We always encourage you to like, share, and subscribe, and, you know, continue the conversation in the comments. Let us know where you are on your journey as far as life outside the US, and ask us any questions or let us know what you'd like to see on a future video. And so with that, Jice, anything else?
That is it. We certainly appreciate you all for coming on and thank you for sharing your insights about
Thank you
Panama City
both.
as
Yeah,
well as
thanks.
the BEIP tour, Black Expats in Panama. Again, last shout out to Charlotte Van Horn.
Yes.
Thanks
Yes,
so
so
much.
thanks,
Amazing,
Brian and
Charlotte.
Deena. Thank you, Quench crew, and we'll see you on a next GenX Quench video.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.